And I did a lot of stupid stuff and a lot of...
Have you gotten rich off pointless foreign wars?
No, I have not done that yet.
Oh, you haven't? Okay. You haven't forced people to inject substances in their bodies? Okay.
No, I've never done any of that.
When he got toward the end,
you're seeing this big alignment, and even on environmental issues. It's so weird to me because the Democrats have become subsumed in this carbon orthodoxy.
When he started talking about creation.
And what that's done is it's forced them to do something that you should never do if you're an environmentalist, which is to commoditize and quantify everything. So everything is measured by its carbon footprint, how many tons of carbon it produces. And, you know, you're basically, you're putting everything in that kind of box of being able to quantify it and explain its value by numerically. And the reason that we protect the environment is just the opposite of that. The reason that we protect the environment is because there's a spiritual connection.
I stopped. I was like, whoa, this is Sophiology. This is pure Sophiology right here. Because I wrote down a couple of quotes. But one of the things he said,
there's a love that we have. I got into the environment because I wanted, this connection to the fishes and the birds and the wildlife and the whales, and the Purple Mountain's majesty.
And all of his words came out. He's probably said this a number of times, but he wasn't reading a teleprompter. When he uttered the words like fish and birds, they felt so alive, like it was actual poetry when he was speaking. And people might think I'm trying to be hyperbolic, and I'm not. When you just think of statistics, then you think of a bird.
I understood that the way, God talks to human beings through many vectors, through each other, through organized religion, through the great prophets, through the wise people, the great books of those religions, but nowhere with the kind of detail and texture and grace and joy as through creation.
And where he and Tucker Carlson both actually approached the Sophianic is when he was talking. One of the things he says, God talks to human beings in many vectors, right? That holy kind of experience that people have, even if they don't have a religious background, through nature, through creation.
It's very eloquent on it.
And when we destroy nature, we diminish our capacity to sense the divine, understand who God is and what our own potential is and duties are as human beings. And that...
I hope what you just said, by the way, is chopped up and put all over every social media platform in the world.
And it's interesting, both Bobby Kennedy and Tucker Carlson are outdoorsmen. People who don't have a relationship to nature, especially intellectuals. I say Sebastian Morello in his book, I think what he say, intellectuals who don't have a relationship to nature will eventually poison people with their horrible ideas.
Wow, yeah.
It's a paraphrase, but that's the idea, and it's true.
Yeah.
Living the life I live, and the people I know who, especially the people who hunt, they're the most loving and appreciative of the creation of anybody I know.
When we destroy nature, we degrade our own ability to experience the divine.
Yeah, and that it's not about quantifying stuff. That's what the devil does. He quantifies everything, right? And that is, what he wants us doing. Put a number on it. And the reason we're preserving these things is because we love our children, and it's because we get nature enriches us economically and spiritually and culturally and historically. It connects us to those 10,000 generations of human beings that were here before there were laptops.
At what age were you when you had this realization that it was all collapsing?
I don't know exactly. I don't ever remember not having that understanding.
And it connects us to the most important spiritual lesson. All of the organized religions that we know of today.
And this is where he really became Sophiology for me, when he started talking about the great religious traditions the importance of nature for those traditions.
The central revelation of every one of those religions always occurred in the wilderness. Moses had to go into the wilderness to listen to hear God's voice and see the burning bush. He had to go to the wilderness of Mount Sinai to get the commandments. Muhammad who was a city boy from Mecca, had to go to the wilderness of Mount Hera on a camping trip with his kids and wrestle the angel Gabriel in the middle of the night and have the first surahs of the Quran squeezed from him. Buddha had to go into the wilderness, and wander for years and then sit under the Bodhigaya tree to get his first revelation of nirvana. And Christ had to spend 40 days in the wilderness to discover his divinity for the first time. And his mentor was John the Baptist, who lived in a cave in the Jordan Valley and ate honey of wild bees and locusts. And then all of Christ's parables come from nature. I'm the vine, you are the branches, the mustard seed, the little swallows, the scattering the seeds on the fallow ground. Because that is where we sense the divine. God talks to us through the fishes, the birds, the leaves. They're all, words from our Creator.
Nature is vision, epiphany, indeed theophany. It is the discourse of life itself as it shows itself in and through the myriad forms of the natural world. She is also a veiled goddess, whose veil, according to an ancient inscription, says, "No man has lifted." But nature is not the kind of mystery that can be solved, as in a Sherlock Holmes story, in which something that at first seemed marvelous and even awe-inspiring proves to be something simple and trivial. On the contrary, the investigator may remove veil after veil, but the scientist, be he the manipulator of genetic codes or the astrophysicist concerned with origins and causes, can come no nearer to seeing the face of the veiled goddess than did her worshippers in ancient Egypt. Nature, as Blake understood the symbol of the veiled goddess, so ancient, so archetypal, is the veil. In Indian terms, nature is Maya, appearances, or as Plotinus understood, a mirror in which the soul sees itself. According to the myth of Cupid and Psyche, nature is the house of the generated soul, in which Psyche's attendants and servants are the elements and creatures of the natural world. It is not my intention to denigrate the study of nature in whatever form. Her field of marvels extends before us in whatever direction we travel. Some, like Blake, have never lost that sense of paradisal participation. We are mistaken when we think of nature poetry as conferring meaning upon nature. Rather, nature is itself the language of the true poetry of the universe to which the poet listens. Sun and stars, trees, clouds, birds, every creature are words in the language which the universe speaks itself. The pre-literate Bushmen of Africa, the Australian Aborigines, and all children know that language in which all that exists in nature has meaning and value. We witness an unending discord of the spirit of creation, but we no longer look, no longer listen as we speed along motorways in our machines, insulate ourselves from the music of the wind or waves and leaves and rain with transistor radio sets that shut out this unceasing sacred discourse. Yet when at moments we attend, is it not with a sense of homecoming? And I think that you know exactly what I mean.
And that is why we preserve nature.
Yes.
And by the way, the best thing that you can do for climate is to restore the soils.
I mean, one of the things he said is soil is the answer.
Yeah, that's a Wendell Berryism.
The soils are the solution to everything.
That's the archetypal thing.
Steinerism, right?
Right.
Right when people talk about carbon capture and all this carbon madness, right?
The soil will absorb all that carbon. And it'll absorb the water. It'll stop the flooding. It'll give us healthy food.
I mean, goes back to Rudolf Steiner, 1925 or 1924 with the agriculture lectures. Everything about biodynamics is about the soil.
Soil. It's the root metaphor for everything. Yeah,
and he's right.
It's very divine feminine, by the way, too.
And I know it from experience.
Yeah.
That's how you sequester. I mean, this is basic, simple thing of sequestering water and carbon.
And that's what our national policy has to be. It has to be restoring the soil. And that is, everybody, listen, if you want to unite America, then talk about these things. Talk about the fishes, the bird, the wildlife. The Democrats are putting these offshore wind farms and are exterminating the whales.
I know.
Most of us got into this because of the whales. And they're about to extinguish the right whales, the last ones on Earth, because with these monstrosities that are, that are costing us 3 times the amount. We don't need them. It costs 33 cents a kilowatt hour when you can get onshore wind for 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And who's making the money? Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, foreign governments. And the other thing that they're funding, hundreds of billions of dollars. This is what climate has turned into, is these climate capture pipelines, and are wreaking havoc with the agricultural lands across the Midwest.
And that's the insanity of the so-called net zero movement. It's anti-environmental. I mean, they put up those wind farms offshore, which kill whales, and then they put the wind farms onshore, which kill eagles. In England or Scotland, they're cutting down like thousands of acres of trees to put up solar farms. I mean, for fuck's sake. It's just crazy.
Stealing people's property rights with, eminent domain. And who's making the money? BlackRock. And it's a useless technology that does not work. It's just all a boondoggle. And that's what's become the environmental movement in this country. And if you depart from that orthodoxy, you're expelled from it.
He just showed such calm, wise, righteous indignation at the idiocy. And he mentioned, where is it going, folks? It's going to BlackRock. He named it. This is pretty high level to be naming BlackRock.
If you want to make Americans fight each other, talk about carbon. If you want to bring Americans together, talk about habitat protection.
Yeah, nature.
The whole point is, and Bobby Kennedy was right, if you got people on this kind of food, and I know this from experience, if you get people onto real food, their health improves profoundly.
Yeah, everybody says, if you could tell anybody anything super important, it would be eat real food.
Casey and Callie, for those of you who haven't seen the show.
I think this book is going to have a big effect.
I'm in the operating room in my 5th year of my surgical residency, and I'm looking down at a patient in front of me who's on our 3rd revision sinus surgery. And, I know how to diagnose her. I know how to write the prescriptions. I know how to do the surgery. But what I kind of realized in that moment was I have no idea why this patient's actually sick. She has so many other health issues, prediabetes, arthritis. She's got some brain fog. She's got obesity, and she's got this sinus issue. And in my training, I was never, ever, ever taught to look at the whole patient, to look at how all these things are connected. And I was only taught how to, do the surgery and then bill for it. And I realized that there's a huge problem in how we're practicing medicine right now, which is we're ignoring the root causes of why Americans are sick. And we're profiting off of patients getting sick and then doing things to them. That's the way the business model of healthcare works. The way that healthcare, which is the largest and fastest growing industry in the United States, makes money is you have more patients in the system having more things done to them for longer periods of time. And when I kind of put some of these pieces together and realized that my training had totally, essentially incapacitated me from really understanding why patients are sick and how to actually help them thrive, I actually had to walk away from the surgical world because I realized that I was going to be making money off of essentially not spending time helping patients understand their health and actually just profiting off their illness.
So
I
9
left.
years into medical training at Stanford, you gave it up voluntarily.
I knew that I couldn't cut into one more person until I understood why Americans are getting sicker every single year. I think that the unfortunate thing is that doctors don't really understand because every level of our education is systematically focused on blinding us from thinking about root causes. We have over 100 medical and surgical subspecialties right now. And how you make money in the American healthcare system is you take a patient with 10 different issues and you send them to 10 different specialists, put them on 10 different meds, maybe they eventually have 10 different surgeries. You never actually are taught how to put the pieces together, look at the whole body as a system, which of course it is. And part of this is because, who are the people underwriting our medical education? It's the pharmaceutical companies. We are taught how to be very algorithmic and robotic in how we look at patients. And
the foundation of our diet is ingredients that we aren't biologically made to eat, that didn't exist 100 years ago. The foundation of our diet is three things when you look at any label. It's added sugar, processed sugar, which basically didn't exist 100 years ago. It's just from natural sources. Ultra-processed grains, which were invented 100 years ago. The processing takes the fiber off. They're basically hidden sugars, devoid of nutritional value. And seed oils. Seed oils are the top source of American calories. And this is actually
seed oil.
The
top source of American calories.
Soybean oil, canola oil. This is the baseline of American calories right now. And these seed oils were actually created by John D. Rockefeller as a byproduct of oil production. It's basically engine lubricant. And the Rockefeller and those aligned with him actually lobbied to have this suitable for human consumption. That's how seed oils came into the American diet. They're much cheaper, but they're highly inflammatory. And just by definition, just at the highest level, these ingredients and all the chemicals we can't name that are in ultra-processed food are not natural ingredients that our bodies are made to handle. So there's, as we talk about in Good Energy, this produces a lot of side effects to our cells.
All of these conditions are caused or driven by the exact same thing, which is metabolic dysfunction, this core foundational issue of how our bodies on the cellular level function, which is driven by our toxic food system and our toxic environment. These subtle, insidious forces that are creating slow, progressive illness starting now in fetal life that allow patients to be profitable and on the pharma treadmill for their entire lives. They make us sick, but they don't kill us, and then we are drugged for life. You look at what's happening in children. A child born in a hospital in the United States today, within hours of coming from source into this, into this body, the first thing that happens to them is pharmaceutical intervention without really asking, there's barely informed consent about this. That child's eyes are smeared with erythromycin ointment and they're given a hepatitis B vaccine in their first day of life. And what are these two things for? I mentioned this because it's just emblematic of how we're put on the pharma treadmill from the moment we are born in this country for reasons that are very strange. The erythromycin ointment is to prevent chlamydial infections of the eye, which we test women for chlamydia. So why would every baby in the United States need this ointment if the mom doesn't have it? And the Hep B vaccine is for hepatitis B, which is a sexually transmitted disease and IV drug user disease, of course, which babies are not going to be exposed to. And yet every single baby in America is getting the intervention. So from literally the day we are born, we're on this treadmill.
So, why not test the pregnant mother for those?
They do.
And if you push, and I welcome anyone to do this with their doctor, you get to two things. You get to the American patients are too stupid to remember, so we need to do it right away. That's literally like what they say. And then my doctor told me that the child at daycare could trip over a needle that has hepatitis B on it. That's literally what they get to. That a needle could be on the playground, that somebody just did heroin or something, threw the needle down, and it has hepatitis B blood on it. I asked the doctor, has there ever been in human history a case of hepatitis B being transferred that way? They said no. That it's only through intravenous needles and sex. So you actually, to steel man this, and again, welcome anyone to respond, there's not actually a scenario, absent of intravenous needles or sex, that a person gets hepatitis B. There is not a reason for this to be given, but it happened, and I saw this. It was a huge investment for this vaccine. It was a huge, huge economic problem, and this shouldn't be controversial. Think about being at these drug companies. You want the drug given out when you've made the investment.
This is without giving drugs, so we can optimize the microbiome, presumably through good diet and sometimes giving probiotics as well. And we can also dramatically improve someone's respiratory immunity just by giving them a tablet or a capsule with basically dead bacteria in it.
Yeah, it's so simple that no one gets it, no one wants to get it because it's just so ridiculously simple. But it is. It's a physiological process made to work at its best.
Well, why on earth? Why isn't every doctor in the world doing this? You're giving a simple capsule, a simple bacteria. They're just bugs that you swallow them. They're recognised by the Pairs patches. That sends the specific information to boost the immunity in the respiratory mucosa, to boost the immunity in the lungs, and people don't get these bad respiratory infections, or they're much more resilient to them. And people with chronic lung disease get less acute exacerbations, what we call
absolutely.
Acute exacerbation of chronic obstructive airways disease, which we
and that's
get
the area
loads of.
Before COVID, that was the area we worked in. With 8 randomised controlled trials, it's the only way that you can reduce the admission to hospital with people with COPD, chronic emphysema. We halve the admission rate. I'll tell you, there are at least 3 reasons. I could probably think of 5 or 6 why we're having this ridiculous discussion when it can make such a difference. The first is it's not very sexy. Big pharma companies like monoclonal antibodies, they like cloned antigens. Look at how messenger RNA took over in COVID. A hopeless vaccine, a dangerous vaccine. Everyone who really looks at the data, and it's just coming out, and certainly no better than a flu vaccine, and much more dangerous. But it's sexy. It's sexy.
It's new, it's innovative, it sounds scientific, it sounds all clever clogs. It sounds like it's at the cutting edge of medicine, but in actual fact it doesn't work.
What could be less sexy than killed bacteria?
Yeah.
This is true. This is true. Yeah. Number two. We've actually got a patent on this, but by and large, it's extremely hard to patent killed bacteria. If you have a monoclonal antibody, you have a cloned antigen, you patent the technique, the methodology, and all of those things. And so the big companies don't even want to think about this. They hate us with a passion because we potentially could cut into their massive earnings. I mean, we're talking about, just in COPD, something like a $30 billion US market per year, with treatment that doesn't even work very well. And the third reason is that this is basically a very cheap, simple, safe treatment. We've seen a bit of this in COVID, I think, John. It's something that you don't even need a prescription. It's basically, it's not a probiotic, but in many ways it fits into that probiotic over-the-counter type thing. It's very safe. No side effects that we're aware of, and we've looked at literally thousands of people, and so you've got at least 3 things.
When you go down that road, when you start asking why, you realize it is extremely, extremely simple. That all aspects of modern American society are rigged against the American patient to get us, addicted to food, allegiant to pharma, and just spending 10 hours a day on our phones, addicted. And now we are all sick, our bodies are breaking, and it's leading to all these organ-specific symptoms that are related to a very simple root cause.
And Gandalf stands and says, "You shall not pass." That is our prayer and our hope for our family, our marriage, and the work that I try to do to say, this darkness has torn down so much of our world, and modernity is collapsing and things are collapsing. But we, by God's grace, can say this will not pass to our children. We will raise them in a sacramental view of the world. We will do everything we can to offer them, right, the seeds of a new world in which they can grow. And so that's a bit of my backstory. And from that point, I homeschooling my girls, trying to recover a sacramental vision of the world, a sacramental way of living in the world through classical education and commitment to participation in a local church.
Can I just press you just a tiny bit?
Sure.
I hate this.
I know.
Why did you come to that conclusion and none of your colleagues did? I think it's really important to understand why certain people see obvious truths while everyone else, including smart people, are blinded to them. What about you allowed you to connect these pretty obvious dots?
Parenting.
How? What did your parents do?
My parents. Our parents focused on incentives. Incentives are everything. Incentives are why Americans are sick right now. If we changed the incentives, we'd get healthy in 2 years. Our country would be the most competitive country in the world. My parents' incentive in our family was to ask questions, not to have any stars or marks or anything, So what was celebrated in our family was sitting down at the dinner table in DC and asking questions and poking at ideas. We were celebrated for thinking about things in a bigger picture. That is not, you talked about this with Tim Dillon on your recent podcast, the boomers, they just want the stars for their kids, to get all these little badges. But that was not what was celebrated. My parents didn't
We
care.
developed our own compulsion to climb up the ladder, but it was always instilled ask
Add
questions,
value,
and
ask questions,
we never
think
felt
for yourself.
Actually like our parents were that happy with rising up. And it was like, are we being good people? Ask, and that was really instilled in us.
Did they have a moral, explicit moral center? Like, this is right, this
I think
is wrong?
they were very spiritual people.
Yeah.
We were raised with spirituality. We were reading, sacred texts and the Bible and Rumi and Ayn Rand and all these different things from a young age, discussing it at the dinner table, thinking about philosophy. And so that was what was celebrated.
So they were not conformists.
When I quit my surgical residency in my 5th and final year, after hundreds of thousands of dollars in my education, my parents threw me a party. They were
No way.
They came.
No parent would do that.
No parent. They were, and they never told me to quit.
Hundreds
but
of thousands of debt.
Absolutely. They were so proud of me for coming to my own conclusions and seeing it. And there's a lot of...
So the incentive for parents, and at least in DC where I raised my children, is to tell people in your neighborhood, your friends, that you have a daughter who's a Stanford
They
educated
never pushed
doctor.
us to go to Stanford. They never pushed us to I never once, ever in our entire childhood, they said, you need to go to your college counseling meeting, ever. They were about having fun and thinking. We were, they were older parents too. My parents were in their 40s when they had us. They lived lives. They were not living through us. They were spiritually grounded. They're not afraid of death. They aren't driven by the materialism that just makes you rack up a wall full of, awards. It was about,
you're making me emotional.
Yeah, that is the reason. It brings me to tears.
Oh my gosh.
I cannot wait to have children. There is no greater role. There is no greater role in this world.
I really like the way that you frame it through this sacramental view of the world, as being a way that you wanted to raise your family.
We're commanded in Scripture to raise our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And you can't raise your children in a value neutral way. That itself is pretense to a value, to say that value neutral is valuable, right? There's no such thing as value neutral. There's no such thing as agnostic about ultimate questions. So as we raise our kids, I want them to develop their own view of God. Okay, well, what you're saying to them actually is God's not that important. It's like a bubblegum flavor you can pick, right? Mm-hmm. So there is no neutral in raising our children, and we are, for Christians, it's a biblical commandment, obligation to raise our children, form them into the best that we can with the knowledge we have, right? So we're all recovering from the collapse of modernity, and we're all at different stages in that recover, and there's abundant grace from the Lord in that. But this desire to get good grades, or this desire to be liked, or this desire for power or for money, the sinful, the disordered human heart, standard academic discourse is not sufficient to safeguard our school from, the darkness that lurks within the human heart. Is that tracking with some of what you were saying?
Yes.
And, I was sold such a bill of lies, like climb the corporate, climb the medical ladder, become the chair of an institution. I can think of no greater thing that we can do than have children and keep them healthy.
Yes.
Right. And I just, up until a couple years ago, I didn't even want to have children because I thought it was a liability to this value system of just like rise the ranks, make money. But I don't think there's anything more important we could be doing than creating healthy children who are thinking for themselves, who are eating healthy food. And I cannot wait for that role. And I think it's a spiritual corruption of our society right now that we have forgotten that this is the most important thing that we can do. It's unbelievable how far off we are. And I think it is deeply a spiritual crisis because we have lost sight of what really matters in our lives.
Lewis pictures that so beautifully, so powerfully in this apocalyptic, the world's falling apart, the end of man is near. What do we do? What do we do?
You look at everybody, whether they're trying to battle weight gain, whether they're trying to beat cancer, eat real food. We could do a whole show on just the 12-minute of the end of the interview.
Yeah.
But we could probably do a whole show on just this part of it, the topsoil and carbon, because I got the chills because this is the big theme. And again, you name it, Michael, as Sophia versus Ahriman.
Yeah.
But it's whole number versus spirit. You know, and he said when you reduce it to Carmen, you reduce it to measurable things. And that's the whole Boris Pasternak thing, the reign of our guest Christopher Krama. The reign of numbers, Rene Guénon would say. But for Boris Pasternak, again, like it was anything human versus the tyranny of numbers. And that just says so much to me. You know, Jesus was born in the middle of a census. King David did not like the idea of a census, looking at human beings through the lens of quantity and not quality. You know, and the fact that Kennedy played, you know, instead of left and right, he didn't leave that space empty, folks. He didn't leave it empty. He introduced the major theme we need of the time is, you know, the reign of quality over quantity. Right now, left brainism and the reign of quantity is, look at that as the driving force. In Steiner's terminology, they call that Ahriman.
But here, and this is what Bobby said.
Do your homework. Yeah.
What Bobby said, though, I mean, to even drive it home further, he said the devil quantifies.
Yeah, right.
His exact words.
Yeah, it was great.
And in my notes here, the devil quantifies / Ahriman, right?
Yeah, we said the same
thing. Which
right?
you got to think. I mean, he's got to.
We don't know. I mean, I know you're saying that he must have read Rudolf Steiner.
Yeah.
No, I think you could get that basic idea from so many. That's what art is in our time. That's the paradigm that you call Sophia versus Ahriman. You know, that Rene Guénon, the reign of, you know, you don't necessarily need Steiner, but you can be right.
I'm sure he knows about biodynamic farming.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
I'm sure
if he was a nature guy, you're right.
And you can't avoid it. I mean, Prince Charles knows about it. And Prince Charles, or he's King Charles now. I used to have respect for him before he became a globalist douche. But
I think it was Maximus the Confessor said, we were given the book of scripture because we had lost the ability to read from the book of nature.
Right.
You know, as we move through this time, you know, with what we do now know, and I'm not saying all world religions are the same. People who know me know I think, you know, religion might have been the negative instance of, you know, you had the ecclesial experience that got transfigured into religion, which is a different thing.
Yeah.
Anyhow, you know, we've lost the ability to read from the book of nature. Could what Kennedy is saying about the sacramentality of nature, Sophia, the descending of Sophia, the great rose and things like this, could it be that we are being called to learn to read from the book of nature again as a way of getting out of this crazy left brainism, this ant-heap, this termite mound, you know, this mechanical scientific way of looking at the world that reduces everything to carbon?
No, I think that's what I've been pushing for a long time now. But I think what was amazing to me is to hear somebody in political life basically espouse Sophiology in a very clear way.
And again, make it clear for our listeners.
Well,
what specifically
he's saying that
basically
he's, you know, the kind of the central Sophianic intuition is that divinity shines through nature at times.
Yeah, Terrence Malick's films.
Yeah. Yeah, it's the splendor and
the supernatural.
And the thing is, when that happens, you don't look at nature as something to be optimized. You look at it. You really look at nature in terms of being a steward, or being in relationship to it, right?
Yeah.
You become a different person by having that experience, but the thing is, as I've said before, I don't think this is just something that is particular to certain kinds of people. I think this is a fundamental human impulse.
I know, but so let's put it this way, as opposed to what we typically perceive as left and right, or conservative and liberal, or Republican and Democratic. Again, another way of saying Sophia versus Ahriman is this: the degree to which we reduce our vision to a left-brain scientific way of looking at something, the harder it is to have those experiences of nature, right? And this is one of the things that we get passionate about. The position is not against science, but it says science is a tool, and now it's become the master.
Well, yeah, in scientism, and we saw over COVID who the new priest became, or the new pope became Anthony Fauci, right?
Yeah, right.
People listened to him for spiritual guidance, really.
Yeah.
And it was diabolical.
And he was happy to hand it out.
He was. But on the other hand, let me just get using Bobby Kennedy and Tucker Carlson as examples. I mean, Tucker definitely a man of the right, Bobby definitely a man traditionally of the left. But they both agree when it comes to nature, and both of those guys were tearing up.
Yeah,
talking about this relationship to nature. So I don't think this is a left-right thing.
You looked at all at Ian McGilchrist's work on the two brain hemispheres?
A little bit.
He talks about the reason we're falling off the cliff now is that in his view, the left hemisphere of the brain has actually begun to take control more than it is intended to. And that in actuality, the right hemisphere is the one that should be the master, because the right hemisphere sees the world in all its complexity. The right hemisphere sees the nuance. The left hemisphere is very good at what it does, but it doesn't see as much as the right hemisphere sees, and therefore the left hemisphere should sort of submit to the right hemisphere. I've read the whole book, and I think because he's not looking at it through the symbolic lens that you're discussing, and he's not looking at it through a Christian lens, although he's more and more talking about faith being an important part of people's lives. It seemed to me as I was reading the book that it was the way he describes the left and right hemisphere is a pretty clear description of masculine and feminine, not in physical terms, but in the archetypal picture of the two. And as he brings up all these examples from history and philosophy of times that the left hemisphere is more dominant and times that the right hemisphere is more dominant, I'm kind of wondering if it can't be more the kind of thing where the feminine spirit that's in the world at various times sometimes seeks to take control, but also sometimes, as it is presently, I think, coming at it with the assumption that the feminine would be better off if it just took on masculine characteristics. If we all, if we're all given the right to join the army, and if we're all given the right to ride horses, and if we're all given the right to be people that climb the poles and fix the wires for the electric company, and if women can do all of those things, then women will be equal to men, rather than the feminine being recognized for the uniqueness and the unique power that's given to the feminine and the unique power that's given to the masculine and the purpose for the differences and all of that. I think that aspect of reality gets clouded in different times in history. And I mean, the masculine is taking over more and more now because the feminine is just saying, well, hey, that's obviously the better way. Let's all go that direction. Whereas if the feminine was standing strong as feminine, it wouldn't be happening. So
I call her the great lady in most of my books, and that's actually the title of my most recent book. The more I studied, the more I realized that she was the missing piece in a lot of our attempts to tell the story of the temple and of the people in Jerusalem and Judah, and indeed in Israel in the north as well. And the more I've studied this, the more I've realized that, well, the more I've thought, how on earth have I missed her for so long? And as everyone else, most people still missing her. This lady had a major place in the first temple. And a lot of the figurines, when they were found, were awfully near the temple, and there's an awful lot of them. Thousands, literally thousands have been found from the first temple period, had been smashed, systematically smashed, which suggested that there had been a concerted effort to destroy her. And starting from a point like that, you say, well, who were these? Who was she? Whom did she offend that she ended up written out of the way we read the Bible, and ended up, for Bible-based archaeologists, she ended up in the trash? That's a very interesting place to start. So that's where I started. And I started looking for evidence of a female figure. Sorry, this is a bit like a detective novel, but
this is
I'm
amazing.
laying out the case for you. Mary took on the role
of the great
of
woman,
a great temple figure who was the lady of the temple. She was the mother. She was the heavenly mother of the kings in Jerusalem. And her earthly manifestation, if you like, was the Gevira, the queen bee in Jerusalem, which is very interesting indeed. Now, another of the temple lady's titles was the Holy Wisdom. And wisdom sayings are introduced with the term blessed are or happy are, and it's the same name, Ashrei. Ashrei ha. The Psalter begins, blessed is the man, Ashrei ha-ish. So you can tell where the old wisdom sayings are, and they are based on her name. Page after page of titles given to Mary, Theotokos, bearer of God. And I can find all those titles in the biblical and non-canonical texts about the Lady of the Temple. Now, that can't be coincidence. Now, much of the evidence for the Mother in Heaven has not been passed down through biblical or written sources, but has come down through people's worship, people's way of painting, all these things, other channels. Go now to Proverbs chapter 3. Find the book of Proverbs.
It's a good one, Jackson. Do us right.
Proverbs 3:13 through 18. It says, "Happy is the man that findeth wisdom, and the man that getteth understanding. For the merchandise of it is better than the merchandise of silver, and the gain thereof than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things thou canst desire are not to be compared unto her. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold upon her, and happy is everyone that retaineth her."
There you are. That's a perfect piece of wisdom poetry. It begins with happy is the man. Happy is the man who finds wisdom, the man who gets understanding. And it ends with, and those who hold fast to her are called happy. So this is a happy poem. And when you see in verse 14, it says, the gain from it is better than the gain from silver. There is no word it in Hebrew, no neuter. It has to be either him or her, right? And then a bit further down, she is the tree of life. Now, there's a well-known story about somebody who was told to eat of the tree of life in the middle of the Garden of Eden. And a certain snake said, "Come on, my tree's exactly the same." And the reader at this time doesn't know that this is the ancient serpent that deceived the whole world, as it says in Revelation chapter 12. And the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is made to seem very like, if not identical to, the tree of life. Come on, have my tree, it's much nicer. And what happens? Well, we know the rest of that story. Adam and Eve lose access to the tree of life. And that was interpreted as meaning the time when the old priesthood were thrown out of their temple. They no longer had access to the lady. And so Adam becomes, at the end of Genesis 3, dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt return.
Okay.
Now.
So if you read the Adam and Eve story as a temple, as temple literature, that the garden is the temple, Adam is a priest, Eve is a priestess, then essentially what you're saying is that the tree of life represents the proper understanding of the divine feminine in the Holy of Holies, and they settle for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which gets them cast out of the temple.
Which gets them cast out, and they no longer have access to the tree of life.
Wow.
If you bring the lady, if you bring the mother back into read the way you read the Hebrew scriptures, that's the sort of thing that comes to life. And you don't have to use just the written text. You can read the liturgies, you can look at the pictures, and you can say, what's coming through here? You don't need just to,
have it spelled out perfectly.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be just on the written page. Right.
And that the challenge for our next era, whatever we're going to call it, is to bring them back together, to synthesize them again. And that I think, and this is part of kind of the insight of phenomenology and the need to integrate phenomenology into our understanding, to realize that we are always first and foremost knowers. We are always first and foremost within the experience of being a human who looks at the world. I'm not sure how that maps onto the masculine and the feminine, but one thing I have been thinking about lately is, so humans, we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, right? And so the macrocosm is heaven and earth, the integration of heaven and earth. Christ, the Logos, he's the incarnational principle. He is the one who created all things and in whom all things hold together. So on the cosmic level, we have heaven and earth, spirit and matter, this incarnational sacramental world held together by Christ. And we are a microcosm. We are an image of Christ. We are a microcosm. We also stand between heaven and earth. And that is our role to represent Christ in our own domain, in our own place in the cosmos, bringing together heaven and earth in our own world. So what that means is that every human being has within them both the masculine and the feminine.
Yes.
They went to this extreme form of monotheism, of erasing the mother and the son and just putting it all into one that is unknowable, unseeable. Okay.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Right? And that Lewis says, toward God, we are all feminine. We receive from him our being.
Yes.
But toward creation, we all participate in the cultural mandate and the work of bringing form and meaning, being sub-creators, right? So we both have the masculine and the feminine in us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But Lewis, I think he shows us in his stories that what that means, though, is in a sense, we have to be rightly ordered. We are feminine first as we receive from God. Because if we don't receive from God, what is it that we have to give? Right? So I don't know. Again, I have to think about McGilchrist and what you're saying, but
what you just said is so perfect, because the way McGilchrist talks about the right hemisphere is that the right hemisphere is the one that has access to the world. It has access to the outside of the brain. The right hemisphere sort of has access to the nous. Okay, to this world of sense, but also of imagination.
However much we have learned, what is given to every child at birth unsought is incomparably, immeasurably more. Given with life itself, inseparable from what we are, we have no need to learn or study that on which our eyes open, our ears hear, our fingers touch. We have only to look and to listen. Rather than understanding nature better by learning more, we have to unlearn, to unknow, if we hope to recapture a glimpse of that paradisal vision of childhood.
This world of sense, but also of imagination. And then the right hemisphere decides what to pass on to the left hemisphere. So the left hemisphere is working with what the right hemisphere has given it. So, I mean, if you think of it in terms of not only masculine and feminine on a horizontal level, but if you think of it in terms of the mother, the son comes from the mother, and then the son and his wife come together, and then another son comes from the mother, and so it's always coming through the mother, right? Always coming through the feminine. So the new life is always coming into the world from the feminine, but the masculine has a role to play, very important role to play, and the two working together. So in each of us, there is both this, in my mind, there is both this masculine and feminine operating in our brains, and there's a purpose in that, because that masculine and feminine is what makes the world. I mean, that's what's at the foundation, right? It's the marriage of the bride of Christ is the foundation of everything. So That's why it makes sense to me.
The thing that I find really valuable about this understanding is, to me, it's always been a little confusing that you have the Father, you have the Son, but you can't have a son without a mother. You can't have a father without a mother. And so it seems like there's this family of God that used to exist. And all of us intuitively know that there's something divine about family. When you've been given birth to 2 children, right? And my wife has given birth to 2 and about to give birth to our 3rd. And there's something so sacred about that experience. And it really is like the veil parts and you have that moment with the divine. And the understanding of this, I think it helps us realize that the veil between the divine of our Heavenly Father and I believe Heavenly Mother as well is much thinner when we participate in creation as they created as well when we have children. And so I love talking about this because I think it highlights the family and the importance of having children and marriage and all of that.
Looking at it as they are meant to be in a beneficial opposition in order to bring about something greater than either one could produce on their own, which sounds more to me like a marriage. Then, did you just send some balloons up on your screen?
I did not mean to. I guess
It was amazing. All of a sudden, these beautiful balloons are going up on the screen.
It was a sign that idea was, fantastic and worthy of celebration. Yeah, that makes sense how that maps on. And, I'm not remembering the Hebrew right now, but the Hebrew word in Genesis for Eve, for wife, is
there?
It indicates that kind of helpful opposition.
Yes, yeah. So
you can left brain history too, and you and I, when we feel bad for somebody who doesn't know the dates of the Civil War, is that they don't have, again, Owen Barfield or anybody, George Lukács, a sense of history. Right, which is just
that's the thing, right?
Yeah, and that's a sense of that beats part of this anxiety epidemic, because we can see ourselves as part of a story that's greater than us.
Why is it that the people just do not get it when Jesus is teaching? Certain people, because they have lost the spiritual sight, the spiritual gifts of perception that the lady gives, because they've lost those, because they've rejected them, they can't understand what Jesus is about. And that's a very, that's so clear throughout all the strands of the New Testament.
It's in Matthew 13 too, right? Where the question is, why do you teach in parables?
That's right.
And the answer is, you have seen the mysteries of the kingdom.
That's right. You've seen, you know what it's about. And it's this theme of rejecting the lady and the continued rejection of the lady that runs right through into the New Testament. And it's a pity that so many of us maybe not rejected the lady, but simply never noticed either that she was there or that she had vanished.
Wow.